Hello, everybody, and welcome to chapter number 6, Inflation and Unemployment, where we focus in on our next two big macroeconomic indicators. And this is probably one of the most relevant chapters that we take a look at because inflation and unemployment, these concepts are something that we hear on the news story every single day. So what does it mean if we have an inflation rate that's positive? What happens if it means we have a negative inflation rate? And the same thing in terms of unemployment. So what happens if we have a 3.5% unemployment rate, which is what we had before the coronavirus pandemic hit? What happens if unemployment spikes all the way upwards to 14, 15, even 20 to 25% in such a short amount of time? Will we ever return to normal? This is what we're going to be focusing in on in this particular chapter. We're interested in calculating both of these concepts, inflation and unemployment, and a few of the ways that we can sort of mess around with the statistics. They're very, very easy formulas, very, very easy ways to manipulate the data, and we'll see a few of the problems that are going to shape up with inflation and unemployment statistics. We'll first start off by taking a look at inflation. So our current inflation rate for the past few years has really been closely about 2%. We really haven't deviated much from that range. So we are interested in defining what inflation is and explaining how it is measured and how the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, provides us three different measures of inflation. We take a look at the CPI, the PPI, and the GDP deflator. Then we're going to go ahead and turn our attention to unemployment. And unemployment, like inflation, the formulas are very, very easy, but there's a little bit of idiosyncrasies that need to be involved with each of them. So how do we define in the labor force versus out of the labor force, between employment and unemployment? That's something deeper that we need to go ahead and get into. And then we'll wrap up the rest of the unemployment section by focusing in on what the full rate of unemployment is going to be, or the natural rate of unemployment, exactly where our economy should be converging to over a long period of time, essentially what is considered normal for the US economy. So first of all, let's go ahead and talk about what inflation is. And inflation is just a general rise in the prices of goods and services. And we can go ahead and focus in on a few goods where inflation is happening. So gasoline, in this example that we see on the slide. If the price of gasoline goes from 95 cents to $1.99 all the way to $3.83, we notice that this is an increase in the price of this particular good, and we can consider this to be some type of inflation. So if you can believe this, gasoline was less than $1 per gallon in the 90s and early 2000s. Here we can also take a look at a few other goods as well. So take a look at college tuition. Before, college tuition only cost you a few $1,000s to get a 4-year education, but nowadays it costs you tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars to get that same type of education. The increase in the price of tuition is what we consider to be inflation. And take everyone's favorite disgusting sub, Subway. Years ago, how much did a Subway sub, a foot-long sub, cost? They advertised it as a $5 foot-long, but now how much did that same exact sub cost? It costs about $8, $9, $10 for the same disgusting sub. So increases in the price of goods and services is what we consider to be inflation. And while we can go ahead and target very specific goods, whenever we talk about inflation in general, we talk about just goods and services, all the goods and services that we can purchase on an everyday basis. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at a market basket of goods and services, which is what the BLS says that we buy on a monthly basis on average. So inflation, it can be targeting one specific good, but we go ahead and generally say that inflation is going to be for all goods and for all services that we can potentially buy within the United States and in any country, because they typically measure in the same manners. One question that we want to ask is, do we typically say inflation is a good thing or a bad thing for us? And the first thing that pops into your head is, hey, inflation is probably going to be a bad thing for us. It is known as one of the twin evils within the economy, along with unemployment. Because what happens to us when inflation occurs? And when inflation occurs, that just tells you that you're going to be able to buy fewer goods and fewer services. So essentially, your purchasing power is going to decline. So a question that we want to ask, starting off with inflation, is, what happens to your purchasing power when inflation happens? So what happens to purchasing power when inflation occurs? So when inflation occurs. So here, the easiest way to take a look at this is to define what purchasing power is. And purchasing power on the most simple basis is what can we buy for an amount of money, or a number of currency. So purchasing power is the number of goods and services that can be purchased for a unit of currency. that can be purchased for a unit of currency. For unit of currency. So number of goods and services that can be purchased for a good or for a unit of currency is describing our purchasing power. So if we have $5, what exactly can we buy for that $5? And when inflation occurs, that just tells us that our purchasing power is going to go down. So here, we typically do say that inflation is a bad thing because that same $5 can no longer buy us the same amount of goods and services. So with $5 before, we can buy an entire foot-long sub from Subway, but $5 now, it can probably only buy us half a sub. So in this instance, because inflation has occurred, we have a lowering of our purchasing power. That same amount of money can no longer buy the same amount of goods and services. So in order for us to protect against inflation, we have a number of things that we can actually do. What do you think are the two main ways we can protect ourselves against inflation? So here, another question that we can ask is, how do individuals protect against inflation? Protect against inflation. So another way to put this is, how do we maintain the same amount of purchasing power? First thing that probably comes into your head is to go ahead and save and invest. Save and invest. If you just have that $5, you put it into your wallet or put it under the mattress, under your bed, that isn't going to be generating any type of interest, so you're losing purchasing power just by holding cash and not doing anything with it. If you take that money, you put it into the bank account that generates some type of interest, if you put it into the stock market or get some type of returns on that, you are going to be maintaining your purchasing power and even maybe grow your purchasing power in this instance. So here, easiest way for you and I to protect against inflation is to go ahead and save and invest. We just don't want our purchasing power to go down just by holding cash in this instance. Another way that we can go ahead and protect against inflation is to go ahead and ask our bosses, ask our employers for raises, for higher wages. So workers demand higher wages. Demand higher wages. So if you've been working at the same exact job and haven't gotten a raise in quite a while, that means effectively you're doing the same amount of work but getting less money for it. Your purchasing power has declined. So every single year we should be going to our bosses, we should be going to our employers and asking for wages that are at least commensurate or at least match the pace of inflation in order to maintain our purchasing power. So here, inflation does happen within the United States or all across the country as well. So we do want to go ahead, save and invest, and ask for raises every single year. So go ahead and take a look at this particular video right here and tell me exactly which one of these ways or what Dwight correctly identifies when it comes to inflation. So doing a little bit of inception right here, a video inside of a video. So take a look at this clip with The Office. What does Dwight correctly identify here? He correctly identifies that if his wages don't increase with the rate of inflation, his purchasing power is going to go down, which is exactly why he wants this wage. So here, we do see that this is one way that we can go ahead and protect against inflation just by going to our bosses, employers, and asking for wages that are commensurate with inflation. And we do notice that wages have, although prices have risen significantly over time, wages rose even faster for the vast majority of workers. It's just only the current time period where we see this sort of wage stagnation, and that's only affecting the small majority of jobs with the minimum wage jobs and the more menial jobs. Another example of inflation that we see right here is with McDonald's. This is a menu from the 1950s, so you can go ahead and see exactly how much each of these menu items cost back then. 19 cents for a cheeseburger, 20 cents for the Frosty machine that probably never worked back then. It doesn't work right now. But as you can see right now, if you go to McDonald's, you won't be paying these prices for these particular goods. A cheeseburger probably costs you about $1 now. This Frosty probably costs you $1.99 or something higher than that, depending on the size that you get. But this is exactly what we see here with inflation. It's just it increases in the prices of goods and services over time.